A frozen lake breaks. 10 wolves are saved. If you're listening from the USA, Canada, UK, Australia, South Africa, or anywhere else in the world, drop a comment and let us know where you're tuning in from. And if you love alpha romance stories, subscribe to Linda's audiobook Haven. We absolutely love hearing from you and bringing you more stories like this one. Elizabeth learned early that silence kept you breathing. She moved through the pack house like a shadow, head down, shoulders curled inward, feet quick and quiet against stone floors worn smooth by centuries of wolves. The great hall smelled of pine smoke and wet fur, of power and belonging, things that had never been hers. Elizabeth. Sheila's voice cut through the morning air like a whip. The firewood won't stack itself. Elizabeth didn't answer. Answers invited conversation, and conversation invited cruelty. She simply nodded and turned toward the woodshed, ignoring the ache in her arms from yesterday's work, and the day before, and all the days stretching back into a childhood she barely remembered as her own. The pack didn't hate her. Hatred required attention. They simply used her, a pair of hands without a name, a body without a rank, a girl without a future. She hauled water when the wells ran low. She scrubbed floors when visiting dignitaries arrived. She existed in the spaces between their lives, necessary but invisible. Pathetic, Rosa muttered as Elizabeth passed, arms loaded with split logs. The comment wasn't even meant for her, just spoken into the air, the way you'd comment on bad weather. Elizabeth had stopped flinching years ago. The territory was ruled by strength. Wolves who could shift before their 10th winter were celebrated. Those who showed alpha traits were groomed for leadership. Fighters earned respect. Healers earned gratitude. Even Omega wolves who kept the peace had value. Elizabeth had none of it. She couldn't shift, not fully, not the way others did. Something inside her remained locked, sealed behind a wall she'd stopped trying to break. The elders said it meant her bloodline was weak. Sheila said it meant she was broken. Mary said it meant the moon goddess had forgotten her. Elizabeth thought it might mean she simply wasn't supposed to be here. She stacked the firewood in perfect rows, the way Sheila demanded, then moved to the kitchens where Nandin was already barking orders. The winter gathering was 2 days away, and the pack house buzzed with anxious preparation. Leaders from 4 territories would arrive, alphas, heirs, warriors, all gathering at the frozen lake for the ceremonial unity hunt. It was politics wrapped in tradition. Elizabeth understood that much. The territories had been fractured for decades, old grudges festering beneath polite alliances. This gathering was meant to heal wounds, forge bonds, prevent war. Elizabeth's role was to stay out of sight and keep the wine flowing. "You'll serve the high table," Nandin said, not looking up from the meat she was carving. "Keep your eyes down. Don't speak unless spoken to. And for the love of the goddess, don't embarrass us." Elizabeth nodded. She'd heard it before. Every gathering, every ceremony, every moment she was forced into the presence of wolves who mattered, she was reminded that her only job was to not be noticed. She scrubbed pots until her hands were raw. She polished silver until her reflection stared back at her, thin face, dark circles, hair the color of winter branches. Plain. Forgettable. Safe. That night, alone in the small room she shared with 2 other Omegas, Elizabeth stood at the window and looked toward the lake. Even from here, she could see it, a vast sheet of black ice stretching between snow-covered pines, smooth and unbroken under the moonlight. Beautiful, deadly. The lake froze every winter, thick enough to hold ceremonies, strong enough to bear the weight of 100 wolves. The elders blessed it before the gathering. The ice was sacred. It had never failed. Elizabeth pressed her palm against the cold glass. Something whispered at the edge of her thoughts, a feeling she couldn't name, a pull she didn't understand. She'd felt it before, in quiet moments, like a thread connecting her to something vast and ancient and just out of reach. She pulled her hand back. Whatever it was, it wasn't for her. Girls like Elizabeth didn't have destinies. They had duties. The next morning, she woke before dawn and returned to work. She carried linens, arranged guest chambers, prepared trays of bread and smoked fish. The pack house filled with arrivals, wolves from the southern forests, the eastern ridges, the northern peaks. Elizabeth moved between them like smoke. She caught glimpses of their faces. Clinton, the Southern heir, young and arrogant. White, the Eastern enforcer, scarred and silent. Randy, the Northern strategist, sharp-eyed and cold. And then, just before sunset, he arrived. Christopher, the Alpha King. Elizabeth was in the courtyard when his convoy entered, black vehicles flanked by warriors, the air itself seeming to shift as he stepped out. He was taller than the others, broader, moving with the kind of confidence that didn't need to prove itself. His eyes swept the courtyard once, cataloguing everything, dismissing most of it. Elizabeth dropped her gaze before he could see her watching. "Prepare his chambers," Sheila hissed, suddenly beside her. "And don't touch anything you don't need to." Elizabeth nodded and disappeared inside. She'd heard stories about Christopher. Everyone had. The Alpha King who unified the broken packs after the War of Ash. The wolf who'd killed his own father to stop a massacre. The leader who ruled not through cruelty but through something colder, absolute authority. He didn't need to be cruel. He simply was, the way mountains simply stood. Elizabeth smoothed the furs on his bed, checked the fire, placed fresh water on the table. Her hands trembled not from fear, but from exhaustion. She was so tired. Tired of being small. Tired of being nothing. She left the room before he arrived. That night, she dreamed of ice cracking. Of water, black and endless. Of 10 wolves sinking, and her hands reaching, and something inside her breaking open like a dam she didn't know existed. She woke gasping, heart pounding. Outside, the winter moon hung low and full. The gathering would begin tomorrow. The morning of the gathering broke cold and sharp, the kind of cold that bit through fur and settled in bone. Elizabeth was already awake. She'd been up since before dawn, hauling supplies down to the lake pavilion, wine casks, ceremonial bowls, winter pelts for the seating platforms. Her breath came in white clouds as she worked, frost crunching beneath her boots. The lake stretched before her like a mirror of black glass, impossibly smooth. Pines ringed the shore, their branches heavy with snow. In the center of the frozen expanse, pack builders had erected a ceremonial platform, carved wood and ancient stone, symbols of the 4 territories woven into the design. It should have been beautiful. Elizabeth felt only unease. "Faster," Sheila snapped, appearing beside the pavilion with another Omega in tow. "The leaders will be here within the hour, and if everything isn't perfect." She didn't finish the threat. She never did. The threat was Elizabeth's existence itself, one mistake away from being cast out entirely. Elizabeth nodded and kept working. By mid-morning, the shore was transformed. Banners hung from the pines, crimson and gold for the Southern Territory, silver and blue for the Eastern, green and black for the Northern, and deep violet for the Central Pack, Christopher's domain. Fires burned in iron braziers. The smell of roasting meat filled the air. And then they began to arrive. The Southern Pack came first, Clinton at the front, his father's heir, young and too eager to prove himself. He wore his arrogance like armor, laughing too loud, gripping his warrior's shoulders with the familiarity of someone who'd never been denied anything. His eyes swept the pavilion, cataloguing wealth and power, already calculating advantages. Behind him came Willie and Cleo, younger wolves from prominent families, their faces bright with the thrill of their first major gathering. Elizabeth kept her distance, refilling wine cups, adjusting pelts, invisible. The Eastern Pack arrived next, White leading them, a wall of muscle and scar tissue, a wolf who'd earned his rank through blood. He didn't speak. Didn't need to. His presence was a warning. Behind him, Lester and Fred moved with the careful precision of trained enforcers, eyes never resting, always watching. Then the Northern delegation, Randy at the head, sharp-featured and cold, the kind of intelligence that cut like a blade. Angelo and Jean flanked him, advisors who whispered strategy like prayers. Taylor brought up the rear, a young tracker whose eyes held the stillness of a wolf who'd learned to survive by being smarter than stronger opponents. They gathered at the pavilion, circling each other with polite words and hostile undercurrents. Old grudges. Territorial disputes. Blood debts that went back generations. Elizabeth poured wine and pretended not to hear. "Where is he?" Clinton finally asked, impatience cracking through his diplomatic mask. "Where's the Alpha King?" As if summoned by the question, The air changed. Christopher arrived without fanfare, no grand entrance, no theatrical display. He simply appeared at the edge of the gathering, and every wolf present felt it. The shift in atmosphere. The weight of authority that needed no announcement. He wore simple dark clothing, no ceremonial regalia, nothing to mark his rank except the way every other wolf instinctively straightened, stepped back, lowered their eyes just slightly. Elizabeth, pouring wine at the far edge of the pavilion, froze. She'd seen him yesterday, but at a distance. Up close, he was something else entirely. Older than the others, not in years, but in presence. A wolf who'd survived things that would have broken lesser men. His face was hard, unreadable, his grey eyes missing nothing. Those eyes swept across the gathering and, for one terrible moment, landed on Elizabeth. She looked away instantly, heart hammering, certain she'd somehow offended him by existing in his line of sight. But he'd already moved on, greeting the other leaders with the bare minimum of courtesy required. No warmth. No false friendship. Just cold, efficient politics. "Shall we begin?" Christopher's voice cut through the murmuring conversations. It wasn't loud, but it silenced everything. The leaders moved toward the lake, toward the ceremonial platform waiting on the ice. The gathering would follow ancient tradition, a symbolic hunt on the frozen lake, a demonstration of unity, a blessing from the elders to seal alliances and prevent war. Elizabeth stayed at the pavilion, watching from the shore as the wolves walked onto the ice. 50 of them, maybe more, leaders, heirs, warriors, witnesses. Their boots rang against the frozen surface, echoing across the water. She should have been relieved to be left behind. Should have been grateful for the distance. Instead, that strange feeling returned. The pull. The whisper at the edge of her thoughts. Something was wrong. Elizabeth's hands tightened on the wine pitcher she was holding. She stared at the lake, at the wolves gathering in the center, at the ice that had held strong for 100 years. The elders had blessed it. The ice was sacred. But Elizabeth had dreamed of it cracking. "Stop being foolish," she whispered to herself. Dreams meant nothing. She meant nothing. On the lake, Christopher raised his hand, and the ceremony began. The elders chanted. The leaders formed a circle. The crowd of witnesses pressed closer, eager to see, to be part of history. Elizabeth watched from the shore, her unease growing with every passing moment. The ice looked wrong. Too smooth. Too dark. Like a held breath waiting to be released. "Elizabeth." Nandin's voice shattered her thoughts. More wine. The secondary tables are nearly empty. Elizabeth turned away from the lake, forcing her feet to move, forcing herself to focus on tasks that mattered, pouring wine, arranging food, staying invisible. Behind her, on the frozen lake, 50 wolves stood on ice that had never failed. Elizabeth's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She told herself it was just the cold. But when the first crack echoed across the water, a sound like breaking bone, sharp and sudden and wrong, Elizabeth dropped the pitcher and ran. The sound came again, louder this time, spreading like thunder trapped beneath glass. Crack. Elizabeth's boots hit the shore just as the first screams began. The ice didn't shatter all at once. It fractured in a spiderweb pattern, lines racing outward from the center of the ceremonial platform, splitting the frozen surface into jagged pieces. Wolves scrambled backward, but there was nowhere to go. The cracks moved faster than they could run. "Get back." White's voice roared across the lake, raw with command. But it was already too late. The ice gave way. Not gradually. Not with warning. It simply collapsed, sections dropping into the black water beneath like trapdoors opening to hell. Wolves fell, some catching themselves on edges, some disappearing instantly into the freezing depths. The ceremonial platform tilted and plunged sideways, taking a cluster of witnesses with it. Chaos erupted. Warriors who'd faced battles without flinching now clawed at the ice in panic, their training useless against water that stole breath and strength in seconds. The cold wasn't just cold, it was a living thing, a predator that wrapped around limbs and dragged bodies down. Elizabeth stood frozen at the shore, her mind unable to process what she was seeing. This wasn't possible. The ice had been blessed. It had held for generations. It was *sacred star. Ropes. Randy's voice cut through the screaming. Get ropes. Wolves on the shore scrambled into action, but their movements were panicked, uncoordinated. Some grabbed ropes but hesitated at the water's edge, survival instinct warring with duty. Others simply stared, paralyzed by horror. In the water, Willie surfaced, gasping, his young face twisted in terror. He went under again before anyone could reach him. Cleo appeared next, her hands scrabbling at ice that kept breaking under her weight, each piece she grabbed crumbling away. Help them, someone screamed from the shore. But no one moved. The warriors, trained killers, wolves who'd boasted of their strength just hours before, stood at the edge of the fracture, staring at the black water like it was a wall they couldn't cross. The cold was too intense. The risk too great. Heroes drowned as easily as cowards. Elizabeth's chest tightened. They were going to watch them die. She looked across the broken lake, counting the wolves still struggling in the water. Willie. Cleo. Clinton was there, thrashing, his earlier arrogance stripped away. White had surfaced but was already losing the fight, his massive frame working against him, pulling him down. Randy clung to a piece of ice that was slowly tipping. Lester. Fred. Angelo. Jean. Taylor. 10 wolves. Maybe more. All dying. And at the far edge of the destruction, Elizabeth saw Christopher. The Alpha King wasn't struggling. He was moving with purpose, diving beneath the surface, pulling someone up, one of the younger wolves, barely conscious. Christopher shoved the boy toward a more stable section of ice, then dove again. He was trying to save them. He was going to die trying to save them. Something broke open inside Elizabeth's chest. She didn't think. Didn't plan. Didn't weigh consequences or survival or the fact that she was nothing, nobody, a girl without rank or value or even the ability to shift properly. She just ran. Elizabeth, no. Sheila's voice was a distant thing, meaningless. Elizabeth hit the ice at full speed, her boots skidding across the intact section near the shore. She didn't slow down. Didn't stop. She ran toward the fracture line where the water waited, black and hungry. Get back. White roared from somewhere in the chaos. You'll die. Elizabeth Dove. The cold was a fist that crushed her lungs. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to surface, to breathe, to escape. The water was so dark she couldn't see, couldn't orient herself, couldn't tell up from down. But she could feel them. That pull, that whisper that had haunted her for years, suddenly became a lifeline. She felt the wolves in the water, felt their fading heartbeats like dying stars, and her body moved toward them without conscious thought. Willie first. His young body was already going limp, sinking. Elizabeth grabbed his coat and kicked upward with strength she didn't know she possessed. Her head broke the surface and she gasped, dragging Willie with her, shoving him toward the ice edge where reaching hands pulled him to safety. She's insane, someone said. Elizabeth Dove again. Cleo next. Deeper this time. The girl had stopped fighting, her eyes closed, already surrendering. Elizabeth wrapped her arms around Cleo's chest and pulled, her muscles burning, her lungs screaming for air she didn't have. They surfaced together. More hands. More shouting. Elizabeth didn't hear any of it. Dive. Find. Pull. Surface. Clinton. His pride had drowned first, leaving only terror and a desperate will to live. Elizabeth grabbed him and hauled him up. Dive. Find. Pull. Surface. White. So heavy. So hard to move. But Elizabeth's arms didn't stop, didn't fail, driven by something beyond muscle and bone. Dive. Find. Pull. Surface. Randy. Angelo. Jean. Taylor. Lester. Fred. Each rescue cost her more. Her body was shutting down, ice forming in her veins, her vision blurring at the edges. She couldn't feel her hands anymore. Couldn't feel anything except that pull, that thread connecting her to the wolves still beneath the water. 9 wolves saved. Elizabeth surfaced one last time, clinging to the ice, her whole body shaking so violently she could barely hold on. The crowd on the shore had gone silent. They were staring at her. At the 9 wolves she'd pulled from death. At the impossible thing she'd just done. But Elizabeth wasn't looking at them. She was looking at the water. At the place where Christopher had been, the Alpha King had not surfaced. Elizabeth's lungs burned with every breath, ice crystallizing in her chest with each desperate inhale. The crowd on the shore was shouting, voices overlapping, commands being barked, chaos trying to organize itself into something useful. But Elizabeth heard none of it. Her eyes were locked on the dark water where Christopher had disappeared. How long had it been? 30 seconds? A minute? In water this cold, a minute was a lifetime. 2 minutes was a death sentence. Someone get her out. Sheila's voice, shrill with panic. Hands reached for Elizabeth from the ice edge, warriors finally willing to risk the water's edge now that the drowning wolves were mostly saved. But Elizabeth pulled away, her frozen fingers losing their grip on the slick surface. "No," she whispered. "Not yet. Elizabeth, you'll die." White's voice, rough with cold and something that might have been respect. "He's still down there." Elizabeth's voice was steadier than she felt. "Christopher's still down there." The Alpha King knew the risks, Randy said from somewhere behind her, his tactical mind already moving past the crisis. He chose to. He saved them first. Elizabeth cut him off, her eyes never leaving the water. He went down pulling others up, and now his. Another voice, older, heavy with authority. "Girl, get out of the water." "That's an order." It was one of the elders, wrapped in ceremonial robes, standing safely on the shore where the ice had never broken. Elizabeth had spent her entire life following orders. She dove. The water swallowed her whole. This time was different. This time her body was already shutting down, already on the edge of hypothermia. Her muscles didn't want to work. Her lungs screamed for air she'd just abandoned. The darkness pressed in from all sides, absolute and suffocating. But that pull, that thread she'd followed to find the others, was still there. Stronger now, brighter. Leading her down into depths that should have terrified her. Elizabeth followed it. Her eyes couldn't see. The water was too dark, too deep. But she didn't need eyes. She felt Christopher below her, felt his presence like a beacon in the void, strong even in stillness. Too still. Elizabeth's remaining strength surged with desperate fear. She kicked deeper, ignoring the pressure building in her ears, ignoring the way her vision was tunneling even in the darkness, ignoring everything except the need to reach him. There. Her hands found fabric first, his coat, heavy and waterlogged. Then his shoulder. His arm. Elizabeth grabbed on with both hands and pulled, but he was deadweight, sinking, and she was so tired, so cold, so far beyond her limits. "Move," something inside her commanded. Not her own voice. Something ancient and absolute. "Move." Power flooded through her body. It wasn't warmth, it was fire. It wasn't strength, it was inevitability. Something that had been locked inside her, sealed away for reasons she didn't understand, suddenly broke free. Elizabeth felt it surge through her muscles, felt her wolf, the creature she'd never been able to fully shift into, wake up and roar. She kicked upward with impossible force. The surface was so far. Too far. Her lungs were empty, her body screaming, but that power pushed her forward, upward, refusing to let her fail. Elizabeth broke through the water with a gasp that was half scream. Christopher's unconscious body clutched against her chest. "There," someone shouted. "Get them out, get them out." Hands grabbed them both, pulling with desperate strength. Elizabeth felt the ice beneath her back, felt the sky above, grey and infinite and the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. She rolled onto her side, coughing water, shaking so violently she couldn't control her limbs. But she kept her grip on Christopher. He wasn't breathing. "No," Elizabeth whispered. "No, no, no." White was suddenly there, shoving her aside with surprising gentleness, his scarred hands moving to Christopher's chest. "Don't you dare die on us," he growled at the Alpha King, beginning compressions with brutal efficiency. Elizabeth tried to push herself up, tried to help, but her body finally gave out. She collapsed onto the ice, watching through blurred vision as White worked, as other wolves surrounded their fallen king, as the shore erupted in frantic activity. Christopher's face was grey. His lips blue. His eyes closed. The Alpha King looked smaller in death. More human. Breakable. "Come on," White snarled, pressing harder. "Breathe, You stubborn bastard. Breathe. Nothing. Elizabeth's vision was fading at the edges, darkness creeping in, her body demanding rest, demanding surrender. But she fought it, keeping her eyes locked on Christopher, that thread between them still glowing in her mind, still connecting them. Live, she thought at him, pouring everything she had left into that connection. Please live. White continued compressions, his jaw clenched, his movements growing more desperate. 30 seconds passed. A minute. The wolves around them had gone quiet. That terrible, heavy quiet that came before grief. And then Christopher's body convulsed. Water erupted from his mouth as he rolled onto his side, coughing violently, each hack sounding like agony but beautiful, so beautiful because it meant he was alive. The shore exploded in shouts, relief, disbelief, chaos trying to reorganize into hope. Christopher coughed until his lungs were clear, then collapsed back onto the ice, his chest heaving, his eyes still closed. But alive. Breathing. Present. White sat back, his own body shaking. You're welcome, he muttered. But Christopher's eyes opened, grey and sharp even in weakness, and they didn't find White. They found Elizabeth. She was lying 3 feet away, barely conscious, her body racked with tremors, ice in her hair and death in her veins. But she was smiling. The smallest, most exhausted smile. You're alive, she whispered. Christopher stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve, a question without an answer. Who are you? He asked, his voice rough as gravel. Elizabeth's smile faded. Her vision finally went dark. And she let the cold take her. Elizabeth woke to fire. Not the water's cold fire. Heat pressing against her skin, almost painful after the numbness. Her eyes cracked open to find herself in a room she didn't recognize, wrapped in furs she'd never touched, surrounded by a warmth she hadn't earned. Don't move. A woman's voice, firm but not unkind. Elizabeth turned her head slowly, because everything hurt, and found an older wolf sitting beside the bed. A healer, judging by the herbs scattered across the side table and the knowing look in her eyes. How long? Elizabeth's voice came out as a rasp. 3 hours since they pulled you from the lake. The healer pressed a cup of something hot and bitter into Elizabeth's hands. Drink. Your body temperature was so low we thought we'd lost you twice. Elizabeth sipped obediently, the liquid burning down her throat. The others? All alive. 10 wolves pulled from freezing water, and somehow all 10 still breathing. The healer's eyes were unreadable. Because of you. The weight of those words settled over Elizabeth like a physical thing. I didn't, she started. Don't. The healer cut her off. I've been treating hypothermia for 40 years. What you did wasn't possible. The water temperature. The number of dives. The fact that you're alive. She leaned forward. So don't sit there and tell me you didn't do anything. Elizabeth looked down at her hands. They were wrapped in bandages, the skin beneath them raw and damaged. She could feel the echo of that power, that surge of impossible strength that had carried her through the water. But it was gone now, locked away again behind whatever wall had held it her entire life. Where is everyone? Elizabeth asked. The gathered wolves are in emergency council. The survivors are recovering. And you, the healer stood, gathering her supplies, are supposed to rest. But something tells me you won't. She left before Elizabeth could respond. Elizabeth sat in the silence, trying to process what had happened. She'd saved them. All of them. Willie, Cleo, Clinton, White, Randy, Lester, Fred, Angelo, Jean, Taylor. And Christopher. The memory hit her like a physical blow, his grey eyes finding hers across the ice, his voice asking asterisk who are you? Asterisk like she was something worth knowing instead of something to ignore. Elizabeth pushed herself out of bed, her legs shaking but holding. She was still wearing someone else's clothes, soft wool and clean linen, nothing like her usual rough-spun fabric. Someone had dressed her, cared for her. It felt wrong. She moved to the door and found it unlocked. The hallway beyond was empty, the pack house unusually quiet. Most of the wolves must still be at the lake, dealing with the aftermath. Elizabeth walked without direction, her feet carrying her through corridors she barely recognized. She'd cleaned these halls 100 times but never truly seen them, never been allowed to exist here as anything other than a servant. Now wolves stepped aside as she passed. Some stared. Some whispered. None of them looked through her anymore. Elizabeth hated it. She found herself at a window overlooking the lake. The broken ice was visible even from here, jagged edges and dark water, a scar across what had been sacred ground. Wolves moved across the shore, salvaging equipment, marking the damage. They're calling it a miracle. Elizabeth spun, her heart jumping into her throat. Christopher stood in the hallway behind her. He looked different than he had at the ceremony, less untouchable. His hair was still damp, his clothes simple and borrowed. There were dark circles under his eyes. But he was alive. Solid. Real. The ice breaking? Elizabeth asked quietly. You. Christopher moved closer, his steps measured. 10 wolves saved from water that should have killed them in minutes. Saved by a girl no one had ever noticed before today. Elizabeth's hands tightened on the windows. Don't say you just did anything. Christopher's voice held an edge. I was down there. I felt myself dying. And then you pulled me back. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that Elizabeth could see the questions in his eyes. Who are you? He asked again, the same words as before, but weighted differently now. And don't tell me your name. I know your name. Every wolf here knows your name now. What I want to know is what you are. Elizabeth's breath caught. I don't understand. The water was 4 degrees above freezing. You made 11 dives. Your body should have shut down after the first 3. Christopher's gaze never wavered. Normal wolves can't do what you did. So either you're not normal, or someone's been lying about what you are. The words hung in the air between them. I can't shift, Elizabeth said quietly. Not properly. I've never been able to. The pack says I'm broken. The pack is wrong. Christopher's certainty was absolute. I felt your power in the water. Felt it holding me, pulling me up. That wasn't broken. That was. He stopped, his expression shifting to something Elizabeth couldn't read. That was what? She pressed. Christopher looked at her like he was seeing something impossible. Ancient, he finally said. Your power felt ancient. Older than the packs. Older than the territories. He took a step closer. Elizabeth, where did you come from? Who were your parents? I don't know. The admission hurt. I've been with this pack since I was a child. Before that, she shook her head. They told me my parents were nobody. That I was nobody. They lied. The conviction in his voice made Elizabeth's chest tighten. Why would they lie? She whispered. Christopher's jaw clenched. That's what we're going to find out. Before Elizabeth could respond, footsteps echoed down the hallway. White appeared, his expression grim. You need to come, he said to Christopher. The council's calling for answers. And his eyes flicked to Elizabeth. They're calling for her. The council chamber was a place Elizabeth had never entered. Servants didn't attend councils. They cleaned them afterward, scrubbing wine stains and collecting forgotten papers, invisible hands maintaining spaces where power was wielded. But now she walked through the doors flanked by Christopher on one side and White on the other, and every eye in the room turned to her. The chamber was circular, carved from ancient stone, with torches casting shadows that danced across walls marked with territorial sigils. The leaders who'd survived the lake sat at a great table, Clinton still pale but alive, Randy wrapped in furs despite the fire's heat, Angelo and Jean hovering close to their alpha-like guards. The younger wolves she'd saved stood along the walls, Willie, Cleo, Lester, Fred, Taylor, all watching her with expressions ranging from gratitude to confusion to something that looked uncomfortably like reverence. And at the head of the table sat the elders of the central pack. Sheila among them, her face twisted with barely concealed fury. There she is, one of the elders said, his voice heavy with false warmth. Our unexpected hero. Elizabeth's instinct was to lower her eyes, to make herself small. But Christopher's presence beside her was solid, anchoring, and she found herself meeting the elder's gaze. Elizabeth saved 10 lives today, Christopher said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. She deserves recognition, not interrogation. Of course, the elder, Marcus, Elizabeth remembered, spread his hands in a placating gesture. We're merely curious. The girl has lived among us for years, unremarkable in every way. And then suddenly she performs a feat that trained warriors couldn't accomplish. He leaned forward. How? Elizabeth felt the weight of the question. The room had gone silent. I don't know, she said honestly. You don't know? Sheila's voice dripped with disdain. You made 11 dives into freezing water. You pulled 10 wolves from certain death. And you expect us to believe you have no explanation? I expect you to show gratitude. Christopher's words were quiet, but they landed like thunder. Without Elizabeth, half the leaders in this room would be dead. Including me. And we are grateful, Marcus said smoothly. But you must understand our concern. Such power, hidden for so long. Hidden? Christopher interrupted. Or suppressed. The temperature in the room dropped. What are you suggesting? Marcus's false warmth evaporated. Christopher moved forward, placing himself between Elizabeth and the council. I'm suggesting that a wolf with Elizabeth's capabilities doesn't just appear from nowhere. Bloodlines like that are tracked. Recorded. Protected or, he paused meaningfully, eliminated. Careful, Alpha King. Another elder, a woman with silver hair and cold eyes. You're speaking of matters you don't fully understand. Then help me understand. Christopher's voice was steel wrapped in silk. Tell me why a wolf powerful enough to defy death itself has spent her life as a servant. Tell me why no one knows her lineage. Tell me, he turned to look directly at Sheila, why she was taught to believe she was broken. Sheila's face flushed with anger. The girl couldn't shift properly. That's not fact. Is it? Randy spoke up from his seat, his tactical mind clearly working. I've seen wolves who can't shift. They're weak. Fragile. He gestured to Elizabeth, pulled my 200-pound body out of water cold enough to stop my heart. That's not weakness. The water may have triggered something, Angelo offered, though he sounded uncertain. A latent ability. No. Christopher cut him off. What I felt in that water wasn't latent. It was sealed. Deliberately. Elizabeth's breath caught. What? Christopher turned to her, his expression softening slightly. When you pulled me up, I felt it, a barrier inside you, breaking. Like something that had been locked away finally set free. That's absurd, Marcus said, but there was something in his voice. Fear, maybe. Or guilt. Is it? White spoke from his position by the door. Because I've been thinking about something. Elizabeth has been here since she was a child, correct? But no one remembers where she came from. No one knows who her parents were. He looked at the elders. Almost like someone erased her history. We are not obligated to, Sheila started. You are when that history might be the key to understanding what happened today, Christopher interrupted, his authority filling the room. The ice was blessed. It should never have broken. 10 wolves nearly died. And the only one who could save them was a girl you've spent years convincing was worthless. He stepped closer to the council table. So I'll ask once more, what are you hiding? Silence stretched like a wound. Marcus was the first to speak, his voice carefully controlled. The girl's parents died when she was young. There's nothing more to tell. You're lying. Elizabeth's voice was small but clear. Every head turned to her. I've spent my whole life accepting what I was told, Elizabeth continued, her hands trembling but her voice growing stronger. That I was nobody. That I was broken. That I deserved nothing. She looked at Marcus, then at Sheila. But if that were true, I'd be dead. We'd all be dead. So either I'm more than you told me, or, her breath hitched, or you made sure I'd never know what I was. Listen to me very carefully, girl, Sheila hissed, standing abruptly. You may have played hero today, but that doesn't change. Enough. Christopher's command cracked like a whip. Elizabeth is under my protection now. As are all the wolves she saved. If you want to maintain the alliance between territories, you'll answer our questions. His eyes were cold. Starting with why you sealed her power. We did no such thing. Then unseal it, White challenged. If you have nothing to hide, help her access whatever's locked inside her. Prove us wrong. The elders exchanged glances. We cannot, Marcus finally said. Cannot. Randy leaned forward. Or will not. The ritual required to seal bloodline power is complex, the silver-haired elder said carefully. Reversing it is not. Who was she? Christopher demanded. Before you made her nobody, before you locked her away, who was Elizabeth? Marcus's jaw tightened. For a long moment, Elizabeth thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, very quietly, she was the last of the moon's blood. The room erupted. Elizabeth didn't understand the words, but she felt their weight. The moon's blood. The council chamber descended into chaos, voices rising, wolves standing, accusations flying across the table like weapons. But Elizabeth heard it all from a distance, her mind trying to grasp something that felt both impossible and inevitable. That bloodline was extinct. Clinton's voice cut through the noise, sharp with disbelief. They were hunted down after the betrayal. Every last one. Apparently not, White said, his eyes never leaving the elders. Christopher raised his hand, and somehow the room fell silent. Explain, he commanded Marcus. Now. The old elder looked like he'd aged a decade in the last minute. The moon's blood were the original guardians. Before the territories fractured, before the wars, they were the ones who maintained the balance between wolves and the old magic. He glanced at Elizabeth, his expression unreadable. They could speak to the ancient forces. Command them. Their power was, he paused, searching for words, absolute. And dangerous, Sheila added, her voice bitter. They nearly destroyed us all. That's history written by those who won, Randy observed coolly. I'd like to hear what actually happened. Marcus sighed, the sound heavy with old grief. 30 years ago, there was a schism. The Moon's Blood family believed the Pax had grown too violent, too disconnected from the old ways. They tried to force a change, to bind the Pax to their will using ancient magic. His hands clenched. It would have stripped us of our autonomy. Made us slaves to their vision of balance. So you killed them, Christopher said flatly. The Pax defended themselves, the silver-haired elder corrected. Most of the Moon's Blood died in the fighting. The survivors were, she hesitated, dealt with. Murdered, Elizabeth heard herself say. Her voice sounded strange, distant. You murdered my family. We saved the Pax, Sheila snapped. Your bloodline wanted to. I was a child, Elizabeth interrupted, something hot and fierce rising in her chest. Whatever they did, I had no part in it. And you, she looked at each elder in turn, you took a little girl and broke her. Made her believe she was nothing. Locked away her power so she could never, her voice cracked, so she could never be a threat. It was mercy, Marcus said quietly. The other Pax wanted you dead too. We hid you instead. Gave you life. You gave her slavery, Christopher's words were ice. You made her a servant in her own home. You told her she was broken while you kept her power sealed away. He moved closer to the table. That's not mercy. That's cruelty. It was necessary, Sheila insisted. The Moon's blood power is too dangerous. If she'd known what she was, if she'd awakened it. She awakened it today, White interrupted. And she saved 10 lives. Not enslaved them. Not destroyed them. Saved them. He crossed his arms. Doesn't sound very dangerous to me. You don't understand what you're dealing with, the silver-haired elder said urgently. The Moon's Blood don't just have power. They have the power to command other wolves. To override free will. I would never. Elizabeth's voice was quiet but absolute. You say that now, Marcus said, almost gently. But when the power fully wakes, when you feel what you can do. I felt it in the water, Elizabeth cut him off. I felt that power, and I used it to save lives. Not control them. Not hurt them. Save them. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear anymore. From anger. You were so afraid of what I might become that you never let me be anything at all. Silence fell. Christopher turned to face the council fully. The seal is breaking. That's what happened at the lake. Her power broke through when the need was great enough. He looked at Marcus. Can it be restored? No, the elder admitted. Once a seal cracks, it will continue to fracture until it fails completely. Within days, perhaps hours, she'll have access to her full bloodline power. Good, Christopher said simply. The elders stared at him. You're mad, Sheila breathed. You're going to trust her with that kind of power? After everything. After everything, she's earned trust more than any wolf in this room, Christopher said coldly. She risked her life 11 times to save strangers. While the rest of us hesitated, she acted. While we worried about survival, she thought only of others. He looked at Elizabeth, and something in his expression made her breath catch. I trust her absolutely. The words settled over Elizabeth like a benediction. The other packs won't accept this, Randy said, though he didn't sound opposed, just practical. When word spreads that the moon's blood have returned. Then we control the narrative, Christopher interrupted. Elizabeth saved the heirs and leaders of 4 territories. That gives us leverage. Gratitude. Debt. His tactical mind was clearly working. We announce her bloodline alongside her heroism. Make it impossible to separate the two. You're talking about using her, Angelo said quietly. I'm talking about protecting her, Christopher corrected. The moment her identity becomes known, every wolf who fears the old bloodlines will come for her. But if she's already a hero, if she's already saved the lives of those in power, he spread his hands, killing her becomes politically complicated. Elizabeth's head was spinning. I don't want to be a political tool. You don't have a choice, White said, not unkindly. The moment you pulled us from that water, you became significant. The question is whether you become a protected significant figure or a hunted one. I can teach you, Marcus said suddenly. Everyone turned to him. Your power will awaken whether we want it to or not. But without training, without understanding the old ways, you could hurt yourself. Or others. He met her eyes. I can show you how to control it. How to use it safely. Why would you help her now? Clinton demanded. You spent years suppressing her. Because I was wrong. Marcus's admission seemed to cost him. We all were. We let fear guide us instead of wisdom. He looked at Elizabeth. Your family tried to force change. We responded with violence. Both sides were wrong. But you, he gestured to her, you have a chance to be better than either of us. Elizabeth felt tears burning behind her eyes. I don't know how to be what you're asking. You already are, Christopher said quietly. He crossed to her, close enough that she could see the conviction in his grey eyes. You jumped into freezing water without thinking. Without training. Without knowing if you'd survive. You just knew people needed help, and you helped them. He paused. That's not something that can be taught. That's who you are. The Alpha King is right, Cleo spoke up from where she stood against the wall, her voice still rough from nearly drowning. You saved my life. You didn't have to. You didn't even know me. But you did it anyway. You saved all of us, Willie added quietly. One by one, the wolves she'd rescued spoke up, offering gratitude, offering trust, offering a future Elizabeth had never imagined. Finally, Christopher turned back to the council. Here's what's going to happen. Elizabeth will train with Marcus to control her power. She'll remain under my protection. And when the other packs hear of this, and they will hear of it, we'll present a united front. His voice hardened. Anyone who wants to harm her will have to go through every wolf in this room first. Elizabeth looked around the chamber, at the wolves she'd saved, at the Alpha King who'd claimed her as his responsibility, at the elders who'd kept her in chains for so long. For the first time in her life, she wasn't invisible. And she had no idea what came next. The council chamber emptied slowly, wolves filing out in clusters, their conversations hushed and urgent. News like this wouldn't stay contained. By nightfall, every pack within 100 miles would know that the moon's blood had returned. Elizabeth remained seated, her body suddenly too heavy to move. The adrenaline that had carried her through the day was gone, leaving only exhaustion and a creeping sense of unreality. Christopher dismissed White with a quiet word, then pulled a chair close to Elizabeth's and Saturday. Breathe, he said simply. Elizabeth realized she'd been holding her breath. She let it out in a shaky exhale. I don't know what I am anymore. You're the same person you were this morning, Christopher said. You just have a name for the power you've always carried. The moon's blood. Elizabeth tested the words, feeling their weight. They said my family tried to enslave the Pax. They said that's how the Pax interpreted it. Christopher's correction was subtle but important. History is written by survivors, and the moon's blood didn't survive to tell their side. Elizabeth looked at him. Do you think they were evil? My family? Christopher was quiet for a long moment. I think they were desperate. I think they saw the Pax tearing themselves apart in wars and territorial disputes and tried to stop it the only way they knew how. He met her eyes. Power like yours, the ability to command wolves, to speak to ancient magic, it could have ended the bloodshed. Or it could have created a dictatorship. He shrugged. We'll never know which it would have been, because the Pax chose violence instead of trust. And now I'm supposed to be different, Elizabeth said quietly. Supposed to prove that my bloodline isn't dangerous. No. Christopher's voice was firm. You're supposed to be yourself. That's all. The wolf who jumped into freezing water without hesitation. Who saved lives without asking for anything in return. He paused, something flickering in his expression, who pulled me back from death when she had every reason to let me drown. Elizabeth's breath caught. Why would I have let you drown? Because I'm the Alpha King. The symbol of everything that's kept you small and powerless. Christopher's honesty was brutal. If you'd wanted revenge, wanted to watch the system that hurt you collapse, letting me die would have been the smart choice. That's not who I am, Elizabeth said, horrified. I know. Christopher's small smile was almost sad. That's why I trust you. And that's why the other Pax will learn to trust you too. Eventually. A knock at the door interrupted them. Marcus entered, carrying an ancient-looking book bound in dark leather. May I? He asked, gesturing to a seat. Christopher nodded, though his posture remained protective. Marcus sat and placed the book on the table. This is the only surviving record of the moon's blood. Most of their texts were destroyed after the war, but he hesitated, I saved this one. I thought perhaps, someday, it might be needed. You knew she was alive, Christopher said. It wasn't a question. I was there when we sealed her power, Marcus admitted. I argued against it. Argued that she was innocent, that she deserved a chance. But I was outvoted. His hands tightened on the book. So I did what I could. I hid this. Watched over her from a distance. Made sure the seal held but didn't break her completely. You watched me suffer, Elizabeth said, her voice hollow. You watched Sheila and the others treat me like nothing, and you did nothing. I know. Marcus's admission was quiet. And I will spend the rest of my life regretting it. But Elizabeth, he opened the book, revealing pages covered in symbols Elizabeth didn't recognize. Your family wasn't what the Pax claimed. The moon's blood weren't tyrants. They were peacekeepers. Healers. The Pax saw their power and assumed the worst, but the truth, he turned the book so Elizabeth could see, the truth is they gave their lives trying to save us from ourselves. Elizabeth stared at the pages. There were drawings, wolves gathered around a figure wreathed in silver light. Images of battles stopped mid-strike. Pictures of wounded warriors being healed. This is propaganda, Christopher said carefully. How do we know it's true? We don't, Marcus admitted. But I knew some of the moon's blood personally, before the war. I knew Elizabeth's mother. He looked at her with something like grief. She was kind. Gentle. She used her power to settle disputes, to heal old wounds between Pax. When the council ordered her family eliminated, she could have fought back. Could have commanded every wolf in the territory to stand down. He paused. She didn't. She submitted peacefully, believing that cooperation was always better than control. And we killed her for it. Elizabeth felt tears sliding down her face. Why? Because we were afraid, Marcus said simply. Afraid of power we didn't understand. Afraid of losing control. Afraid that if we showed mercy, we'd appear weak. He closed the book. Fear makes people monstrous. And we were very, very afraid. Christopher stood and moved to the window, his back to them. The other Pax will be afraid too. When they learn what Elizabeth is. Yes, Marcus agreed. Which is why she needs to be prepared. Not just to control her power, but to defend herself. I'm not a fighter, Elizabeth said. You're more than a fighter. Marcus leaned forward. Your bloodline doesn't just have power over wolves. You can speak to the old magic itself. The forces that existed before packs, before territories, before any of this. He gestured around them. That's what broke the seal at the lake. Your power recognized a crisis and responded instinctively. But instinct isn't enough. You need control. How long? Christopher asked, still facing the window. To achieve basic control? Weeks. To master it fully? Marcus shook his head. Years. Maybe decades. The moon's blood trained from childhood. We don't have years, Christopher said flatly. Word will spread within days. The packs will demand answers, demand proof she's not a threat. Some will demand her death. Then we accelerate the training, Marcus said. Focus on defense first. Teaching her to shield her mind, to resist external influence, to... No. Elizabeth's voice was quiet but clear. Both men turned to her. I don't want to just defend myself. I want to understand what I am. What my family was. What this power actually means. She looked at Marcus. Teach me everything. The history, the magic, the truth. All of it. Elizabeth, Christopher started, his voice concerned, if you push too hard, too fast. I've spent my entire life being told what I couldn't do, Elizabeth interrupted. Being told I was broken, powerless, worthless. Now you're telling me I have power beyond anything the modern packs have seen, and you want me to learn it slowly? Carefully? She stood, her exhaustion falling away. No. If the packs are going to fear me, I want to know exactly what they're afraid of. And if there's a chance, even a small chance, that I can use this power the way my mother tried to actually help instead of hurt, her voice cracked, then I need to learn. Now. Marcus and Christopher exchanged a look. She has her mother's stubbornness, Marcus said quietly. And her courage, Christopher added. He turned to Elizabeth. If we do this, if we train you in the old ways, you understand what it means. You'll be claiming your heritage publicly, accepting the responsibility that comes with it. There will be no going back to invisibility. Elizabeth thought of the lake, of the wolves sinking into darkness, of the moment she'd chosen to dive instead of standing safely on the shore. She'd already left invisibility behind. I understand, she said. Then we start tonight, Marcus said, standing. The full moon rises in 3 days. That's when your power will be at its strongest, and when the seal will break completely. He looked at Elizabeth with something like respect. By then, you need to be ready to control what awakens. Or it will control you. Christopher moved to Elizabeth's side. Whatever happens, you're not facing this alone. Elizabeth looked up at him, at the Alpha King who'd nearly drowned, who'd asked her who she was like it mattered, who'd defended her to a council that wanted her silenced. Why? She asked. Why do you care what happens to me? Christopher was quiet for a moment. Then he said, very softly, because when I was dying beneath that ice, when everything was going dark, I felt you. Your power, your determination, your absolute refusal to let me go. His grey eyes held hers. You saved my life when you had no reason to. When I'd never even noticed you existed. That kind of selflessness, he paused, that's worth protecting. Worth believing in. Elizabeth's heart hammered in her chest. 3 days, Marcus said, breaking the moment. That's all we have. Elizabeth nodded. 3 days to learn a lifetime of power. 3 days to become something she'd never been allowed to be. 3 days until the full moon rose, and the world learned exactly what the last of the moon's blood could do. The 3 days passed like a fever dream. Marcus worked Elizabeth relentlessly, teaching her to feel the currents of old magic that ran beneath the surface of the world, showing her how to pull power without letting it consume her, drilling her in mental shields that could protect her mind from outside influence. Your family's gift was connection, Marcus explained on the second night, as Elizabeth sat cross-legged in the training room, sweat dripping down her face from the effort of maintaining a basic shield. You can feel other wolves, sense their emotions, even communicate directly with their consciousness. But that connection goes both ways. Without proper defenses, you're vulnerable to every strong emotion, every thought, every. Elizabeth gasped as the shield collapsed, and suddenly she felt them, hundreds of wolves in the packhouse and beyond, their minds pressing against hers like waves against a shore. Fear. Curiosity. Anger. Hope. The emotions crashed over her in overwhelming intensity. Shield. Marcus commanded. Pull it back up. Elizabeth gritted her teeth and rebuilt the barrier, one painful layer at a time, until the voices faded to distant whispers. Better, Marcus said. But not good enough. When the seal breaks completely, the flood will be 10 times stronger. You need to be able to maintain shields even while using your power. I'm trying, Elizabeth said, exhausted. Try harder. Marcus's voice was hard but not unkind. Your life depends on it. All our lives depend on it. Christopher appeared in the doorway. That's enough for tonight. We're not finished, Marcus started. Yes, you are. Christopher's tone left no room for argument. He moved to Elizabeth and helped her stand, her legs shaking from exhaustion. She needs rest. Burning her out before the full moon won't help anyone. Marcus looked like he wanted to argue, but finally nodded. Tomorrow we work on active connection. Teaching her to reach out intentionally instead of being flooded passively. Elizabeth barely heard him. Christopher guided her out of the training room and down the hallway, supporting most of her weight. You don't have to do this, she said quietly. Take care of me, I mean. You have a whole territory to run. The territory can wait, Christopher said. You can't. He brought her to her new quarters, not the small servant's room she'd shared with other Omegas, but a proper chamber with a real bed and a fireplace and windows that overlooked the forest. It still felt wrong, too large, too much. Christopher helped her sit on the edge of the bed. How are you really doing? Elizabeth almost gave the automatic answer, fine, I'm fine, don't worry about me. But Christopher's grey eyes saw too much for lies. I'm terrified, she admitted. What if I can't control it? What if the power breaks free and I hurt someone? You won't. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Christopher's certainty was absolute. I've seen you make choices, Elizabeth. In the water, in the council chamber, in every moment since. You always choose to help. To protect. That's not something that changes just because you have more power. My family had the same power, Elizabeth said. And the packs still feared them enough to. Your family tried to force change, Christopher interrupted gently. You won't. Because you understand something they didn't, that real change only comes when people choose it freely. He paused. That's why I'm not afraid of you. Even when you have enough power to command every wolf in this territory, I know you never will. Elizabeth's throat tightened. How can you be so sure? Christopher was quiet for a moment. Then he reached out and took her hand, the first time he'd touched her without necessity, without emergency. Because I felt your heart in that water, he said quietly. When you were pulling me back from death, I felt everything you were feeling. The fear, the determination, the absolute conviction that every life mattered, even mine. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. Power reveals who people really are. And what you revealed was someone worth believing in. Elizabeth stared at their joined hands, her heart racing. Christopher. A knock at the door interrupted them. White entered, his expression grim. We have a problem, he said. The Eastern Pack just sent word. They're calling for an emergency tribunal. They want Elizabeth brought before the Interpack Council to answer for her bloodline. Christopher's hand tightened on Elizabeth's. When? 3 days from now. The day after the full moon. White's jaw clenched. They're giving her just enough time for the seal to break completely before they judge her. They want to see what she becomes, Christopher said flatly. So they can decide whether to accept her or execute her. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Elizabeth pulled her hand free and stood, her exhaustion falling away. Then we give them something to see. Not a threat. Not a weapon. She looked at Christopher. A healer. A peacekeeper. What my mother tried to be. Elizabeth, White said carefully, if you walk into that tribunal and show them the full extent of your power. Then they'll know exactly what they're dealing with, Elizabeth finished. No secrets. No hiding. Just the truth. She straightened her shoulders. I'm done being afraid of what I am. Christopher studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Then we prepare. Not just your power, but your defense. Political alliances, testimonies from the wolves you saved, evidence of what the moon's blood really were. His tactical mind was clearly working. We turn the tribunal into an opportunity instead of an execution. The wolves you saved will speak for you, White said. Clinton, Randy, all of them. They owe you their lives. And I'll speak for you, Christopher added. As will every wolf in my territory. We'll make it impossible for them to condemn you without condemning all of us. Elizabeth felt something warm unfold in her chest. Hope, maybe. Or something deeper. Thank you, she said quietly. Christopher moved closer, his presence solid and reassuring. 3 days, he said. 3 days to master your power, prepare your defense, and show the Pax that the moon's blood have returned not as conquerors, but as what they always should have been. Guardians, Elizabeth finished. Guardians, Christopher agreed. The night of the full moon arrived cold and clear. Elizabeth stood at the lake's edge, the same lake that had nearly killed them all just days before. The ice had been cleared away, the water dark and still beneath the moonlight. Marcus, Christopher, and the 10 wolves she'd saved stood in a circle around her. Witnesses. Protectors. Friends. Are you ready? Marcus asked. Elizabeth closed her eyes and felt for the seal inside her, the barrier that had kept her power locked away for so long. It was fracturing, pieces falling away like ice in spring thaw. Yes, she said. The full moon rose above the trees, and the seal shattered. Power flooded through Elizabeth like a tidal wave, ancient, vast, overwhelming. She felt every wolf within miles, felt their hearts beating, their thoughts flowing, their lives connected to hers through threads of silver light. And for one terrifying moment, she felt the temptation. The ability to command them. To make them kneel. To take everything that had been denied her. Then she felt Christopher's hand on her shoulder, grounding her. Felt Willie's gratitude, bright and pure. Felt Cleo's trust, freely given. Felt the 10 lives she'd saved, choosing to stand with her. Elizabeth breathed out slowly and let the power settle. Not suppressed. Not controlled through force. Just, balanced. Present but not consuming. She opened her eyes. The wolves around her were staring, their eyes wide. Elizabeth knew what they were seeing, her eyes had turned silver, bright as the moon itself, and the air around her shimmered with barely visible light. How do you feel? Marcus asked, his voice careful. Elizabeth smiled. Like myself. Finally. Christopher's hand tightened on her shoulder, pride clear in his expression. Then let's show the Pax, he said, exactly who the last of the moon's blood really is. Elizabeth looked out across the water, toward the future waiting for her. A tribunal. A judgment. A chance to rewrite her family's legacy. She wasn't afraid anymore. She'd risen from the water once. She could rise again. Epilogue. 6 months later, Elizabeth stood in the same council chamber where she'd first learned her true name. But everything was different now. The tribunal had come and gone, not with an execution, but with a treaty. The Pax had seen her power and, more importantly, had seen how she chose to use it. Healing old wounds. Settling territorial disputes. Bringing wolves together instead of tearing them apart. The moon's blood had returned, but not as tyrants. As exactly what they'd always meant to be. Elizabeth had taken her place among the pack leaders, not as a servant, but as the guardian of the old ways. Christopher had ensured her position was protected, her voice heard, her power respected. And somewhere along the way, between late-night strategy sessions and shared moments of quiet understanding, something had shifted between them. Christopher entered the chamber, and Elizabeth's heart did that familiar skip. The Northern Pack just confirmed, he said, moving to stand beside her. They'll attend the Unity Gathering next month. That's all 4 territories committed. A gathering that won't end in disaster this time, Elizabeth said with a small smile. Hopefully. Christopher's answering smile was soft, private, meant only for her. Though I have to admit, the last one changed my life. Mine too, Elizabeth said quietly. Christopher took her hand, no longer tentative, no longer just for comfort. I've been thinking about what you said. About your mother. About how she tried to create peace through connection. And I think she had the right idea, but the wrong approach. He turned to face her fully. She tried to force unity. But you, his thumb brushed her wrist, you've been building it. One choice at a time. One saved life at a time. One alliance at a time. Elizabeth felt her breath catch. Christopher. I know the political complications, he interrupted gently. The Alpha King and the last moon's blood. The symbolism. The pressure it would put on both of us. He paused. But I don't care. Because when I almost died beneath that ice, when you pulled me back, I felt our connection. And I've felt it every day since. Elizabeth's heart was racing. What are you saying? I'm saying, Christopher moved closer, his free hand coming up to cup her face, that I want to build this future with you. Not just as allies. As something more. The Pax will talk, Elizabeth whispered. Let them. Christopher's smile was fierce. We've already rewritten history once. Why not do it again? Elizabeth laughed, bright and genuine and free, and pulled him into a kiss that tasted like hope and new beginnings. Outside the window, the moon rose full and bright. And the girl who'd saved 10 wolves from freezing water finally, truly, came home. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe for more audiobook romance stories, fated mates, and emotional slow burn romances that will keep you hooked. Drop a comment and let us know what country you're watching from. We love hearing from our listeners around the world, whether you're tuning in from the USA, Canada, UK, Australia, or anywhere else. Subscribe to Linda's audiobook haven for your next captivating werewolf romance, enemies to lovers tales, and stories where the underdog rises to claim their destiny. What did you think of Elizabeth and Christopher's story? Comment below.